Kemi Badenoch has positioned herself once again as the most provocative voice on the British far right. At a policy exchange event marking the centenary of Margaret Thatcher's birth, Badenoch proposed that Britain adopt a form of active integration for migrants, especially praising Denmark's anti-ghetto laws. This is no idle rhetoric, it's a deliberate shift in language, ambition and ideology from integration to assimilation. So, let's begin with Denmark. Since 2010, Denmark has operated a controversial suite of policies targeting areas designated as parallel societies, a euphemism for majority non-Western immigrant neighbourhoods often characterised by deprivation and high unemployment. These areas can be subject to forced evictions, the demolition of social housing, restrictions on who can move in, and aggressive policing of residents. The aim, according to Danish officials, is to preserve the social contract of a universal welfare state by preventing what they perceive as cultural balkanization. But this policy has drawn withering criticism. United Nations panels, human rights organisations and legal experts have challenged the Danish government at the European Court of Justice, warning that the laws discriminate on the basis of ethnicity and country of origin. It is, as critics argue, segregation in the name of unity. Yet Badenoch is not deterred. She said assimilation should be the target, and if people don't assimilate, then they integrate. And the logic here is revealing. Inverted decades of multicultural consensus, Badenoch implies that cultural difference is no longer to be respected, but the outcome, absorbed into a dominant, implicitly white British norm. Integration is no longer a virtue, it's a consolation prize. In other words, if you don't do it, you will get blocked, you will get disciplined. Now, Badenoch is not proposing bulldozing estates just yet, but that's where she's going. She's opening the door to a similar policy tailored for Britain's scale. She wants fewer social housing concentrations, more mixing, fewer so-called ghettos, and her words are carefully chosen with, freighted with meaning. We need to move from passive to active integration. But there is a sleight of hand at work here. This is not about Danish pragmatism or urban planning. This is about redefining national identity. It's about the state telling new arrivals, indeed often British citizens born here, that their belonging is conditional upon a set of behavioural and cultural terms that have never been codified and cannot be objectively measured. And it's hard to escape the political theatre behind this. Reform UK is breathing down the Tories' neck. Nigel Farage is talking about deportations and migrant caps, and Badenoch wants to outflank him, not from the right, but from a place of orderly realism. We're not reform, she says, we're the adults in the room. What piffle. The adult in the room is nodding approvingly at forced evictions based on ethnicity. That ought to give us pause. There's a further contradiction here. Badenoch has spoken of a minimal state. She wants the government to shrink in most areas, except policing, defence, and now the enforcement of cultural norms. She says society should discourage unstable families, but not via legislation. So we're left with a strange hybrid, a passive state on economics, an active state on identity. It's a recipe that echoes Thatcherism, but with less emphasis on enterprise and more on conformity. And this is where the irony thickens. The very immigrants that once welcomed Thatcher, Indians, West Africans, Hong Kongers, are now being told their children must prove their assimilation. In this Britain, your postcode, surname or dietary habits must be enough to question your loyalty. And what are the practical implications? What happens to a family evicted by a so-called parallel society? Where do they go? What safeguards are in place to prevent discrimination? Are we to demolish houses in Barking and burn down mosques in Luton? Of course not. But vague ambition leads to dangerous legislation. Denmark began with declarations, it ended with bulldozers. If Badenoch wishes to lead a post-multicultural Britain, she must at least tell us what Britishness means. Is it fish and chips or entrepreneurism? Fish and chips, after all, is not actually British. It's a cultural import. Rule of law or Christmas jumpers. Without that, assimilation is just a coded demand for cultural erasure, an invitation to hide one's difference and perform a caricature of belonging. Britain is not Denmark. It never was. It is older, larger, messier. We absorbed the Normans, the Jews, the Huguenots, the Irish, the Windrush generation, and Ugandan Asians. We didn't ask them to assimilate. We let them become part of the national story in their own voice and on their own terms. They have contributed. We have benefited. To legislate integration is to miss the point. Belonging is earned not through coercion, but through contribution, trust, and time, and no government, least of all one that claims to dislike active intervention, can manufacture that by force. In short, Badenoch has raised the question, how do we live well together? But she's reaching for the wrong blueprint and risking the wrong answer. But that's not surprising. This is, after all, Kemi Badenoch, the person with no ideas who can't really follow the script that's in front of her. The person who wants to out-reform reform, but doesn't have the personality to even get through the first letter. This is a person who is desperate for some sort of policy that defines her. The only policy that defines Kemi Badenoch is inadequacy.